Thank you, Peter, and can I add my welcome to all of you who've braved this unusually hot day to come here. Those of you who've been to these lectures before will know the interest here is that the world is changing. We are moving to a low-carbon economy, and the issue is very much that whether or not Australia will be part of that economy as it develops, and whether or not the kind of innovation that we've been showing around the world, some of which is innovation that we can feel very proud of because it's been created by Australians who've left here and are working in the US and in Europe and setting up extraordinary organisations and extraordinary research and investment in new innovation. But the economy is moving, and what it's coming down to in this country very much is a debate which we'll hear more and more about as to whether or not we want to be part of that new economy or we want to cling to that which we've had in the past, which has given us much of the wealth that we enjoy, which is based very much on the exploitation of fossil fuels. In the past lectures, we've looked at different aspects of that low-carbon economy, and today we are moving to another focus, which is that in leading the world and innovation towards low carbon, in reshaping our economy, there are new organisations and new institutions which are forming, which break out of the patterns of the past. The Forum for the Future, as Peter Mears mentioned, has become extremely well known since its foundation in 1996 by two extraordinary people in Britain, who some of you I'm sure will know, Jonathan Porritt and Sarah Parkin, who I think perhaps viewed from Australia are slightly unusual people because they both seem to have an extraordinary history of being strongly and stridently critical of the mainstream of government, of business, and at the same time, they seem to be able very much to be part of the institutions of change in Britain and to have managed that balance extremely well. The Forum for the Future, if you look at it today, has carried that interesting, critical, but part of the change in all of its work. If you look at the website and look at their partners, I'm sure you will hear some of that today. There is an extraordinary list of many of the most important and largest of our global companies, many of the smaller emerging companies that are taking the areas that are opening up in the low-carbon economy and charting new directions for business. What I think is most interesting about it as an organisation is you'll also find partners from the public sector and partners from the university sector as well. I was lucky enough to be at one of the launches of Forum for the Future in 1997, or late 96, I think it was. It was particularly interesting to me how two people like Jonathan and Sarah, who had been so much critical of the mainstream, could actually chart the course that they were setting out. And I think it's been of great interest to many of us how that's developed over time. When I was part of a European research institute, an international research institute based in Europe, I discovered to my surprise that one of our biggest European projects under the European Research Organisation, the European Research Foundation, had Forum for the Future as a partner, and just how fantastic was the team at Forum for the Future in looking at the area that we were addressing, which was the role of information technology in bringing about a sustainable future, a low-carbon future. So they have held, I think, a fairly unique position that sits in a way that has no real correspondence in Australia between government, between industry, the community sector and research, and have managed that extremely well. Peter Madden, the current CEO who joined Forum for the Future 5 years ago, has a career of 20 years, which I think really complements and reflects that unique position of Forum for the Future, and therefore seems to me to be an ideal candidate. He was, before coming to the Forum for the Future, the Chief Policy or Head of Policy at the Environment Agency, leading teams on areas such as climate change and sustainable communities. But he has a long career at those two extraordinary acronyms in Britain, which we hear a lot about, DEFRA, essentially their Department of Environment, Food, etc., and what was the Department of Industry and Innovation, etc., now Department of Energy, Technology and Resources, and where he's advised the ministers responsible and as well as the Prime Minister in Britain. He's been director of the Green Alliance and been head of policy at Christian Aid. So I think that his past career is really extremely well suited to an organisation charting a new territory, sitting between those areas that now have to be brought together in this extraordinary and urgent and creative task of bringing the low-carbon economy into being now. So I would like you all please to join with me and welcome Peter Madden.
Good afternoon. Chris, Peter, thank you very much, and thank you all for giving up your lunchtime to come and listen to me. As Chris mentioned, we're a UK-based not-for-profit organisation, a charity we call it, and we advise cities, government and some of the biggest companies in the world on how to be more sustainable. And in my talk today I want to draw a little bit on our experience of working with some of these companies to find some solutions. And I'm going to start this afternoon with some numbers. Looking around the audience, there's probably a couple of you out there that were born around the same time as I was in the early 1960s. Back then, how many people do you think were on the planet? Anyone want to hazard a guess? 2.5 billion? Any higher? 4. The answer is 3. So when I was born, there was 3 billion people on planet Earth. Today, how many are there? 6.5. And by mid-century, when we expect the world population to peak, and when I hope to still be alive, how many people will be around? 9.5 billion people. So that's the first thought I want you to hold in your mind, that in a single lifetime, my lifetime, lifetime of lots of you in the audience, global population gone from 3 to 6 to 9 billion. 9 billion people. Okay, next I'd like you to close your eyes for a second. Close your eyes. Think back to the homes that you left this morning and what was in them. A fridge with milk and cheese and meat, electrical goods, one car, perhaps two, parked out front. You got that picture? Now I want you to do a little calculation. Imagine for me, every single one of those 9 billion people on planet Earth enjoyed the same lifestyle that we do, the same resources and the same material goods, and why shouldn't they? How many planet Earths do we need to sustain that? Guess? Thoughts? 7, 8, 4, 5. The answer is about 5 planet Earths. So everyone on the planet lived the same kind of lifestyle Australia, North America did. We need 5 planet Earths. How many have we got? So, at the heart, I guess, of our environmental conundrum is that crunch, that we have a growing number of people, and all of those people have kind of growing wants and needs, because people look around the world, they watch the internet, they watch telly, and everybody wants what the kind of the wealthier and better off people above them want. Of course they do. So escalating wants and needs of those 9.5 billion people, and a finite ability of our planet to satisfy those needs. So we've got a finite ability in how much resources the planet can give to us, and a finite ability of how much of our pollution and waste that it can absorb and deal with. And that kind of resource crunch, that environmental crunch that we're facing, you can look at it in water, you can look at it in oil, you can look at it in fish, but I think perhaps the best example is climate change. And climate change, we know that we're putting too much CO2 up into the atmosphere, the planet is warming, we're changing our very weather patterns, and the scientists now say that we need CO2 cuts, emission cuts, of around 90% by 2050 if we're going to avoid dangerous climate change. So that effectively means completely decarbonising our economy in a single generation. So, thinking back to that challenge that we face, growing number of people on the planet, escalating wants and needs, finite ability of our planet to deal with that and to sustain that. What's our way through, and how do we deal with that? Well, assuming we're not going to find another 4 planets anytime near in the future, we've got some options. Option 1 is you say to those people in the developing countries in India, China, Brazil, Indonesia, whatever, that you can't develop. You stay as you are and keep your low carbon footprint and your low resource use so we can have what we have. Now, that's not morally right, and any of you that have been to any of those countries know that it's impossible. They're going to develop, and why shouldn't they? Another option, if you were a brave politician, you could launch a campaign saying the people of Australia, US, UK have got to give up what they have in order that there's space for those countries to grow and develop. And again, I think it would be a very brave politician that did that. So for me, there's only really one way through this conundrum of how do we meet those escalating wants and needs with a finite amount of planetary resources. And that is to find ways to deliver for those wants and needs much, much more efficiently, using a fraction of the resources to satisfy them and creating a fraction of the pollution. Okay? I think is the only way through our dilemma, is to do things radically more efficiently. And that, I guess, is what's at the heart of these eco-innovation lectures, because above all, that's a call to innovate. Now, luckily, innovation is what humankind is quite good at. And if you think about our modern economy, innovation is at the heart of how our businesses are successful, how they thrive and remain competitive, how they satisfy all the changing wants and needs. Now, in the past, and particularly from environmentalists, innovation has, I guess, been seen as part of the problem. It's been, from too many designers and innovators, it's been about creating more and more stuff, and getting it out there that's digging up resources and poorly packaged and badly designed and doesn't last very long and goes into waste. But increasingly, I think that's beginning to change. If you look at innovators, the work that people like Chris Ryan and his organisation do, innovators starting to be part, much, much more part of the solution, and realise that far from being constraints, these kind of challenges, these need to move to a low-carbon world, are in fact opportunities to do innovation in a whole load of new and interesting ways. So you think about our history, and for, I guess, millennia, humankind, we as human beings, we've derived our warmth, our light, and more recently our transport from burning things. Okay? And for the last 100 years or so, that's been hydrocarbons. Oil and coal and gas that we've dug out of the ground and burnt. That's given us most of our energy needs. If we're going to hit that 90% by 2050, that has to change quite dramatically. And we have to start to, I think, unleash a wave of innovation that we haven't seen the like of since the Industrial Revolution. That means harnessing renewable energy sources, the power of the wind, the wave, the sun, to provide for those needs of heat and light and mobility. And a little fact, the sun in 1 or 2 hours a day provides, in theory, enough energy to provide for the world's energy needs for the whole year. So we just have to get smarter in innovating and finding ways to capture that. And when we do that innovation, it's going to be a huge opportunity for those people who solve it, who crack it. And I think what excites me about that innovation is that it's an opportunity for companies, individuals, simultaneously to make money and to save the planet. And if you're a business, what better mission could you have? So I'd like to turn now and just talk about some of the businesses that we work and some of the things that they're doing to tackle these problems. Before I talk about them, I just want a quick word of warning. I don't think any of these businesses are perfect. Okay, and I don't think any of them have solved this problem. Absolutely, none of them are sustainable yet. But I think they're all doing interesting things, and I think that they're all showing what the possibilities are. So first up there is Unilever. I guess you must have lots of Unilever products here as well. One of the biggest consumer good companies in the world, and they make food stuff. But a lot of what they do is making cleaning and personal care products, detergents, shampoos, this kind of thing, okay? So Unilever were looking at their product range and they realized that these detergents, these washing powders and shampoos and so on were 70, 80, 90% water, okay? And they realized, we're a company that basically moves water around the world. That's not very smart, okay? So they thought, how can we tackle this? How can we tackle this? They thought, I know, we'll concentrate our products so that to do their job, whatever it is, wash your hair, clean your clothes, you need much less of it to deliver what you need. And they came up with a new range. It's called Small and Mighty in the UK. And up there they say half the lorries, half the packaging, half the water. You could also say half the warehousing, half the supermarket shelves, half the bother of the consumer carrying that product home. And if you probably remember, all of you 10 or 15 years ago when you bought, certainly in the UK, you bought a packet of washing powder, it was enormous, thing like this that you kind of struggled home with. And now you can do the same with a little pot. And here's an example of just through rethinking that, Unilever have saved a lot of money. Fewer materials, fewer warehouses, fewer lorries. The supermarkets like it, because it's actually a low-value item. They need less shelf space to sell it. Consumers like it, because it's easier to use and carry around, and the planet benefits from fewer resources. So a good example of redesign, and I can talk to you in questions a little bit more about other stuff we're doing with Unilever, about cold water, detergents, and washing and so on. Second example up is a paint company called Dulux, and they're part of the global chemical giant AkzoNobel. And we've been working with them for a number of years. And we've been trying to redesign their paint with them to make it more sustainable. And if you imagine paint's full of lots of quite nasty chemicals and not necessarily very good for the people that use it, and terrible if the painter at the end of the paint job does something like pour it down a drain into a watercourse. So paint full of lots of nasty. So we worked with them and we said, how do we at every single stage in that paint life cycle strip out the nasty chemicals? I wouldn't quite say this is a paint that you can drink, but it's moving in that direction. And we took out as much carbon as we could, around 40% of the carbon gone, and removed all the nasty chemicals, and came up with this paint, which they launched as EcoSure in the UK. It was very successful, so they're launching it now across Europe and across the world. You might see it soon as EcoSure or EcoSense. And but the interesting thing about working with them, we kind of sorted out this paint, reformulated it, and made it better, but a number of other problems occurred to us while we were doing that. And one of the big ones was any paint and decorating job in the UK, almost no matter how big, whether it's a huge office, the paint turns up in hundreds of these metal 5-litre tins. I don't know if it's the same here, but hundreds of them turn up on site. They have a lifetime on their site of about 3 seconds, where they're poured into a paint bucket, and then somebody has a contaminated piece of metal which they have to dispose of. Okay? So we talked to Dulux, and they said, well, that's not really our problem. We've always done it like that. So we started talking to a few of the building companies we worked with, and they said, well, it is a big problem for us, because we have to pay to dispose of this stuff. So we asked ourselves the question, how do we get the paint from the factory onto the wall in the most environmentally efficient way? And we basically designed, along with ICI and Carillion, one of our big building companies, it's like a big sack of paint that sits on a pallet, and the sack's held together by its own weight. And it's got a spraying machine that, that can spray the walls and is easy to clean in water. And way, way more efficient at getting the paint from the factory onto the wall. And I think, like the first example of the Small and Mighty, the paint example as well, it's kind of asking that question of what's the job you need done, and then how can you do that with the minimum resources and environmental impact. The third example I want to talk about is a company called Interface, which most of you probably won't know because they make carpet tiles. Not the most exciting product in the world, but one that obviously factories and offices and so on across the world need. And a few years ago, their boss, Ray Anderson, he had a bit of an epiphany, and he realized that he wanted to change the way that he was running his company. And he set a very interesting target for his company. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that by 2020, it would have no net negative impact on the environment in anything it did. Okay? So that company, in digging up the resources to produce its carpet tiles, in manufacturing them, in the use of those tiles, and then in the disposal, no net negative impact. And then he's used that big goal to drive back through the company and start to redesign everything that they do. And so their carpet tiles now, you can imagine just how many nasty chemicals used to be in a carpet tile. You can just have to smell them to kind of think about how nasty that is. You can now get these carpet tiles from Interface that you can throw on your home compost and quite happily eat the vegetables that you grow from that. And then he went a stage further and he thought, rather than selling a carpet tile to somebody whereby I get rid of it, it becomes their responsibility and they have to deal with it, I'll change my business model and I will provide them with a flooring surface. Okay? Because that's what they need. They don't actually need the carpet tile, they need a flooring surface. So he began a new business model whereby he basically, people entered into a contract to get a flooring surface from the company. So that was good for the company in business terms. It developed a kind of long-term service relationship. When the few tiles by the door or by the photocopier are worn out, they're the ones that get replaced. You don't have to do the whole floor. And it allowed the company to take responsibility for taking back its product and then dealing with it and reusing it. And I think that shift that Interface are trying to do from selling a product to providing a service is one of the business innovations that we're seeing a lot more of in all sorts of different sectors in the UK. One of my favourite is car clubs. You must have city car clubs over here as well. If you buy a car now, the upfront costs you pay for buying the car, taxing it and insuring it and so on are so high that you're then stupid not to use it. Okay? Every incremental trip that you make after you've paid those upfront costs, the cost is very, very small. But you probably only need that car, perhaps really need it for a small number of journeys a month. So in the big cities in the UK, people are turning much, much more to car clubs because they want the service that a car provides to them on certain occasions during their month and their lives, not the necessity of owning a car. And the fourth of my examples I want to turn to is a supermarket in the UK called Tesco. Now, we also work with other supermarkets, and we work with one called Marks and Spencer's, who've got a fabulous environmental strategy now called Plan A. Anyone's interested in it, go and have a look. It's probably one of the best around. But I didn't want to use Marks and Spencer's as an example, because Marks and Spencer's basically sell to Britain's middle classes high-value goods. Okay? Tesco are more interesting to me because they are big and they have a reputation of being bad in the past. They're a bit like our Walmart. And how big are they? Well, they have a turnover every week of about 2 billion Australian dollars. So about 40, 50 billion pounds each year. And they're very cost conscious. They sell to low-income consumers in the UK. So a couple of years ago, Terry Leahy, who's the boss of Tesco's, looked at the climate science and was taken through it quite seriously, and he got it. And he said, OK, we need to do something about this. And my organisation helped Tesco to design a climate change plan, strategy, and Terry Leahy and I stood up and launched it. And it was a very ambitious strategy. And when he launched it, neither he nor we knew how we were going to fulfil half, two-thirds of it. But he said, that doesn't matter. We're Tesco. We're an innovative company. We can set this kind of target and then we'll make it happen. And it's full of very, very stretched climate change targets, way beyond the kind of thing that government is doing. And guess what? They're starting to make it happen. So we've been working with them on the design of their stores. And that store, which opened earlier this year, 2/3 less carbon than a previous store, just from doing some fairly simple things, like putting natural light in the windows back into your supermarket, by building it of wood instead of metal, by putting putting doors back on the fridges. Later this year, Tesco will be building and launching their first zero-carbon supermarket. So they started to sort out their own footprint and behaviour, but we said to them, actually, Tesco, your big impact is with your customers and in what they do and in how they behave. So they began to take this to heart, and they launched the first company in the UK to launch carbon labelling on products. So there's around 400 or 500 products in store now in Tesco where you can go in and there's a carbon label on the product that tells you about its climate change impact. And they have a long-term commitment to try and label everything. And that sent, as you can imagine, biggest supermarket in the UK, third biggest in the world, that sent shockwaves through the whole supply chain, because everybody suddenly thought, God, we have to measure how much carbon is in everything in order to supply and keep these guys happy. And they did another initiative which we were involved in, which was very interesting, which is green Clubcard points. Now, you must have the same here as well, that you get kind of reward vouchers or points for shopping in a supermarket. And they came up with this idea, well, why don't we have points that reward green behaviours? So if you reuse your plastic bags, if you take stuff for recycling, if you buy green products in the supermarket, you get these green Clubcard points. And they've proved hugely popular, particularly with the low-income consumers. Because low-income consumers said, this green stuff always seems to be about punishment and people telling us off, and people telling us not to do things. Here's somebody at last rewarding us for doing the right thing and for following the right behaviours.